Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to join in to a welcome and thanks that I would like to send to the organization that allowed our organization, our association, to participate in this meeting and share testimonies of what is happening in our industry. Allowing also to review together with you the historical time that we are living in and the recent past time, the crisis of consumption that affected the economic system of the EU did not spare our industry, i.e. pre-processing and distribution of steel products, with the exception of a few sectors that proved to be particularly resilient. There has been a real standstill, a stalemate in production, leading Europe to recession and stopping the growth of many countries, including Italy, which is growing 0 point something. It's a constant that has characterized markets starting from 2008, as we all remember, which reached the climax with the COVID economic period. 2021-22 showed a strong recovery pushed by relaunch plans, but it was temporary. Now we're back to pre-COVID conditions, except for a totally different background situation. Conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, a crisis of the Chinese economy, the Russian market, which is not accessible, the very high cost of energy sources. We should also add variables linked to the upcoming US elections. This is a ballast to the economic recovery. The Green Deal, which is based on unquestionable principles, offers many opportunities for some economic sectors. But unless they are correctly calibrated, the Green Deal risks killing strategic sectors of our economy, first and foremost the automotive industry. And the first effects are already tangible. By its very nature, steel commerce as an industry finds its space between upstream production and downstream use. And it shares with these two sectors the positive results when the industry is healthy, and suffering with them equally when the situation of crisis of demand continued to exist. The first few months of 2024 recorded a decline in volumes in distribution of 6% year-over-year, while the upstream steel production within the European Union increased by 1%, with an overall volume of 87 million tons at the end of August. The distribution data is referred to the month of August only, and it's dramatic. It's about minus 40% compared with the same month of the previous year, 2023. Now, hoping to see the positive effects of the much expected reduction of the cost of money, hoping to see the effects, there is still a climate of distrust by the system. The forecasts for the final part of this year indicate a trend similar to what we have witnessed so far. Now, we will shift the focus to 2025. It's imperative for the European policy and politics to stimulate a dialogue with the rest of the world. in order to lead countries at war to find a peace agreement. Let's not forget that economic systems require social and political stability and tranquility. So before talking about growth and relaunch, we need to solve the issue of peace. Now, with no offense for the steel producing friends, if I contest the commercial defense policies that are in place, since 2018, a number of regulations have been put in place aimed to reduce imports, which climbs recently with the start of an empty survey for the adoption of anti-dumping measures in countries that are already subject to stringent quota limitations. I'm aware, and I'm honest when I say this, of the huge efforts that the European Union asked the European steel industry to make in order to reach the target of carbon neutrality within the established time frame. I'm aware that within the European context, Italian steel mills, thanks to a strong development of electric steel production, are at the top of the world ranking for the production of zero impact steel. I'm aware that if a European steel market has to work in a very complex market, which is undermined by the collapse of the construction, automotive, and white goods sectors, as well as a strong slowdown in the demand of industrial products. Now, allow me to underline, however, that the same crisis of consumption affects distribution and pre-processing equally for many, many aspects. We should consider that production, distribution, and final use live together in the same market and share good times and bad times equally. Now, distribution and pre-processing, as has always been the case, will be close. It will be side by side to the steel manufacturers in Europe, as it has always done. The somehow hostile behavior of Chinese producers that led them to irresponsibly use their production capacities, regardless of the strong reduction of domestic consumption, caused strong pressures on export markets, the only outlet for the huge quantities of steel that was produced and not consumed in the domestic markets. The countries targeted by Chinese are Japan, Korea, India, and others, all countries with a strong steel manufacturing vocation, already grappling with their own crisis of consumption due to the weaknesses in the Chinese market. These countries will be obliged to protect their own economies with commercial or trading defense measures. So Chinese production is subject to customs duties that are very, very high, and they only have limited safeguarded quotas. Other historical exporters of steel products in the EU benefit from export quotas that are not subject to custom duties, which quotas, however, have been recently affected by a dramatic cut, limiting the use of their quotas to 15%. As if this were not enough, recently a survey has been initiated for the application of anti-dumping custom duties. Very often, importers tend to be considered as those operating in competition with producers or manufacturers. Now, taking as an example the volume imported in Italy of products classified as Category 1, subject to safeguards, that is, hot milled coils. And comparing it with total data from the EU, one can see that 45% of this product comes to the ports of Italy. For a correct interpretation of this data, we have to also consider that in 2023, AEDI Aceri Italia in Taranto produced with the support of just one blast furnace 2.6 million tons versus 10 million of the historical good times of IMA. Let's not make a mistake of labeling importers as speculators. To some extent, enemies of the steel market in the EU. Importers are, of course, centers of services and distributors, but before them, we have producers of vertical products with hot coils produce cold coils and coated products. They serve transformers across Europe. Both of them are massively served by steel mills in the EU, but they cannot find full coverage of their needs because of quantity or quality restrictions and because of the range of sizes. A peculiarity should be noted. Among the importers, there is space for steel mills. For their own reasons, they may have decided to cover part of their requirements with imported materials. It is a bad mistake to implement measures aimed at protecting a production sector without thoroughly analyze the impact that such actions have in the internal system, like shortages caused by disembarked goods that are not custom cleared, and the difficulties in having specific qualities or quantities available, very often purchased outside of the EU. This translates in cost increases and at the same time in the decrease of levels of services that the manufacturing industry is subject to. And the latter is then obliged to offload this situation on its products with a loss of competitiveness internationally. All elements of the economic supply chain must be placed in the same conditions. So European politicians should extend their level of attention to the entire supply chain and not limiting their focus on a section of it, no matter how important it may be. Now, a few references to the debate at CBAM. The EU steel mills have been entrusted the hard task to convert their production sites in order to reach carbon neutrality. This is a very complex path that requires huge investments. This is a humongous challenge thrown at the entire world that draws inspiration from an environmentalist ideal that I fully share. However, the issue is not a search for a sharing on a specific problem, but rather the path and the modalities that you want to adopt. The risk is that the deadlines that have been established, our economic system gets there completely destroyed. Assuming that a shift to a green world will be incredibly difficult and burdensome, only a healthy economy will be able to support and endorse the costs required for energy transition. Getting into the specifics of the CBAM regulation, in the financial year 2024, in which the transit phase has started, a number of operational difficulties have come to the surface. If, as expected, they will lead to compensation of CO2 only to imported raw materials and will not be extended to semi-finished and finished products. If this is the case, the manufacturing system will suffer incredibly, and it will be very difficult to stop the escape of many manufacturers towards those countries that are not geographically too far from here, but are less rigid on these topics. I'm reaching the close of my presentation with the hope that we can find an open dialogue involving all associations that engage players, operators producing, transforming, and using steel in Europe, overcoming individual interests. And with a far-fetched approach, we can really look at the future of our extraordinary production system, which at the moment is facing a very, very hard and tough period.